So, finally reached the last session of the day. And I guess before I wrap things up and introduce the last speaker, let's just have a round of applause for everybody who's come on so far and just show your appreciation for the organizers of the day. Give it up. Have you enjoyed yourself? Cool. So I'll fill you in on the rest of the evening after this talk, and then we'll sort things out. You jolt awake. You feel very grateful you're so well dressed, because everyone around you is too. It's London, England. This is MI5. The best dressed man in the room comes over. You're coming with me. You spend weeks together, intercepting terrorism, uncovering dastardly plots, overcoming intense psychological dilemmas. Back in London, you're given a new mission. You go to get equipped, but instead of Q, a new face appears. "Where's Q?" says Bond. "Bathroom," says a new voice. "But I can show you. This new contraption will allow you to fall unharmed from any height." "Thanks," and off you go. You speed bike over some mountains, hang glide over a small fishing village, and partake in a high-speed car chase. As your car rounds the corner of a beautiful seascape, the enemy shoots your wheel and the car spins out of control, rolling 3 times before crashing over the side of the cliff. In slow motion, James pushes the ejector seat and engages the free-fall apparatus, and you cling to him for dear life. But you can't hold on. You're slipping. You're falling, you're tumbling. And there, in that last moment, you don't know what's going to happen, but all you can think of is that church. To be continued. Daan van Berkel, the stage is yours.
So good evening, actually. It's quite a day. Are you having fun? I said, are you having fun? Like, are you having fun? Come on. Woo! Yeah. So this is an awesome conference, and I feel honored to speak here. They offered me the last spot of this day, and the great thing is there's another day to enjoy conferences like this tomorrow, so that's awesome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm this guy. Obviously, I have awesome magic skills. Look for this. Look out. But I'm not gonna entertain you with my magic skills, at least not in the theatrical sense of the word. No, I'm gonna entertain you with slightly different things. It's art and mathematics, actually. So wave hi to art, and also wave hi to mathematics, because these things I'm gonna discuss for you today. So I'm gonna ask you questions, a few questions actually, and for that I need to ask you to raise your hands. Please raise your hand. So if I ask you a question, you have to answer no, drop your hand. So who likes mathematics? So a few hands go down. Who loves mathematics? So who has a passion for mathematics? So those of you with a hand up, come speak to me after this talk, because that would be amazing to intervene. So when I say that I like mathematics, people shy away. And that's actually very sad. So I want to paint a better picture, for fond of better words, of what mathematics can be and how that relates to art. So I want to address a few things. So the sentiment of that mathematics is something that you hate or that's hard is really sad. So this is an ad for a computer software which you can do mathematics in. And I found this ad on a site full of mathematics. So typically, these people that will go to the sites are either interested in mathematics, and the ad company thought that it was a good idea to portray mathematics as something that you have to feel bad about. Which is silly, isn't it? Like, things that people like to do, you shouldn't feel bad about. So I want to explore this sense where this comes from, and I think that it comes from this guy, actually. So mathematics is a very old subject, older than churches, for example, like this one. And the great thing about mathematics, actually, is that it used to be the world. So 2,000 years ago, mathematics was actually geometry, and they thought that that God actually was a geometer. So this picture, this art, God is holding a compass and sketching out the design of the world. And this image is something that mathematics will know, because a lot of mathematics have a God complex. They think that they own the world, or they create the world they live in, which in a sense is true. So another piece of art is Ixkacd. If you don't know it, it's an awesome comic. And in this comic, like, every subject is dissing the other one, and at the end there's mathematics, like way on the other field. And in a sense, this is true. So mathematics isn't regular science in the sense that a mathematical proof, is something that is true in the set that mathematics grows. So in that sense, mathematics is special. But it's not a reason to be cocky about. And unfortunately, mathematicians actually are sometimes very cocky. And it is these people that eventually, if they end up going into software development, tend to ask silly questions. So one of the silly questions I want to talk about is this one. So who knows the fizz-buzz questions? So probably everybody knows. So although this is an interesting question, I like this question, but I don't like it asked in an interview. And a few of the reasons that I don't like the question being asked in an interview is that who in his right mind is going to want this in production? Who wants fizz-buzz in production? I think nobody. So if you're going to an interview and you want to have a job, you want to have a job that reflects the actual work you're going to do at the company, and fizz-buzz is not a good example. The other thing is, I've coded up a solution for you to show you. So I'm going to show this video quite quickly. One solution to this fizz-buzz problem is like this. So I'm going to show you that I start out with an empty directory. So I'm going to list the directory. And then what I do is create a file. Well, actually, I'm going to download a file. I'm going to download the package fizz-buzz. And when that's downloaded, and when it's installed, I'm going to run the executable. And the executable will print out the fizz-buzz numbers for me. And when you answer in an interview that I would solve the fizz-buzz kata in this way, the interviewer will get mad, because that's not the intent of the question, which is silly. If you don't use a third-party tool to solve problems, then in my sense you're a bad developer. But the interview questions these mathematicians or the mathematical-like persons like to ask, they want to see some algorithmic code or some fancy stuff, which is silly. So for me, this isn't what mathematics is about. It's not asking tough questions, but it's exploring, asking questions, actually. So, still to work. So for me, the people that want to stress that software development is mathematics, and if you don't know mathematics, you're about software development, they're plain wrong. I like to see software development like swimming. So I have a quote for that, it's my quote. So swimming is fun. You can be competitive at swimming, and water is essential for that, but it's just there to facilitate the swimming process. And in a sense, this is true for mathematics. There is mathematics in software development, but it's there to facilitate greater means. So there are a lot of dimensions of software development that have nothing to do with mathematics, and that are far more important, like communication, like teams and getting things done on the right time within budget. So take it from a mathematician, software development is mathematics. And if you want to study mathematics to become a software developer, that's like studying water to become a swimmer. Don't take me wrong, water has amazing properties, and it's very interesting to study it, but you shouldn't study it on its own to become a software developer. So I tend to get very sad when people react negatively to mathematics, because mathematics is actually very beautiful, but it's also hard to convey. So does anybody know this picture? So can shout it out. What's this picture? So it's a vase, yeah. Two faces. So actually this picture is called Rubens vase. And if you're not familiar with it, you're in for a treat. Because depending on how you interpret this picture, you can either see two faces facing each other, or a vase. So if you concentrate on the white part of the image, you will see, if you try hard, you will see a vase. But if you concentrate on the black part of the image, you will see two faces. And this is, for me, the interplay between art and mathematics. So it's one subject. And if you look at it in one way, you will see faces, or art. And if you look at it in a different way, you see the vase, or that's in mathematics. So for me, to look at this picture is saying something about interpretation. So you, as a viewer, are actively interpreting this image in the way you want. So it's very hard, or maybe for me at least, impossible to see at one time both faces and a vase. And in a sense, this is also true for mathematics. So those of you who held up their hands when said they are passionate about mathematics, if I would ask you to name your favorite or your most beautiful formula, you probably come up with this. This is Euler's identity. Euler was a prolific mathematician. He wrote over 500 papers, which is a lot, all outstanding papers. And at the later end of his life, he went blind. So I'm not going to ask you to interpret this beautifully typographed equation, because that's not the real beauty. So the real beauty is in interpreting the symbols on the screen. And that beauty is hard to convey. So the beauty of this equation is that it relates a few of the mathematical symbols and constants in such a way that it ends up with zero, which, if you think hard about it, is really awesome. But it doesn't translate to a crowd that isn't the intimate, mathematically familiar with all these equations. So something that is far more, well, welcoming are pictures, just like I show you. So one of the symbols on this equation, actually the eye, plays a role in an image that you probably know as well, which is this one. So again, shout out if you know what this is. This is Mandelbrot, yeah. So this is a type of fractal, and I don't do drugs, but if drugs don't affect your mind in such a way that you see these kinds of images, I don't think that they're worth it. So I could stand here and watch the screen for hours, looking at the intricate details of this image. And again, I would like to ask the question: what is interesting about this image? What is striking about this image? Can you speak up? Yes. So what the crowd said is it's self-similar. So that's actually, thank you for that. The next slide is actually about self-similarity, which is a striking feature of this image. But it's in itself, self-similarity isn't that big. So let me show you another picture. So this is a square. I'm guessing you're all familiar with that image as well. And actually, the square is self-similar as well. So let me show you. If you shrink the original square, and you make copies of it and place them in a tiling way, you will see that the original square is self-similar to the smaller square. And you can iterate this process at indefinite scale, just like the Mandelbrot fractal, actually. But it isn't as enticing as the other image. Or at least I don't think it's really awestruck. I'm not awestruck by this picture, although I would be awestruck by the previous image. So what is this? It's a difference between the beautiful Mandelbrot fractal and the ordinary square. I think I have an idea where to find this magical thing from. So what we could do is we count the number of squares. So let's do that. And for that I made a graph. And this graph is not illuminating anything. So what's on the x-axis is the iteration of how many times I've shrunk the original square, and which on the y-axis is how many squares I need to tile the original square. And I need so many tiles in the last iterations that it will blow all the other numbers out of the water. So So this isn't working for me, so I need to adjust this graph. And what I would do is I would do some mathematical trickery, and this is actually the least interesting part of the mathematics. It is, you sometimes need to do calculations. You can get away from that. But they are a vehicle. They allow you to journey from not understanding to understanding something. So if you do the mathematics, you end up with a picture that is far more illuminating. So this time on the x-axis, it's actually the scale of the smaller squares that I'm using to tell the original picture. And what's on the y-axis is something of the logarithm of the number of the squares. So this is a log-log graph, which are sometimes beautiful in these situations, in the sense that they can convey a power law, which are all big words. I'll stop with the big words now. But what's interesting is that it's just a linear relation. So there's a simple relationship between the size of the small squares and the number you need. And what's interesting is the slope of this line. So if you would bear with me the equation, the slope of the line is 2, which is awesome, actually. If you didn't know that, the 2 is very awesome. And what this relates to is the dimension of the square. So we could do this for a line, for example. If I have a big line and I subdivide it in 3, how many small lines do I need to cover the entire original line? That would be 3. So this is how these numbers get used. So the top one is the number of copies I need to cover the original object, and the bottom number is the scale I change it. So if I scale down the original line by 3, I need 3 copies. So the answer would be log 3 over log 3, which if you do the math on your phone, for example, would be 1. So these numbers are in a sense related to the dimension of the object you're making. And, well, I think that 2 is a good dimension for a square. But it isn't really interesting for the number. So let's do this one more time, but with a twist. So we have this square again. I'm going to subdivide it again in smaller squares, but now I'm going to leave out the middle square. So there's a big hole inside of the middle, and I'm going to iterate that. So I'm going to take this figure, I'm going to shrink it and make copies of it and place them on the corresponding dots. And if I continue doing this, you will eventually see a beautiful fractal that is quite similar in a sense to the more even beautifuler, if that is a word, fractal that you saw of the Mendelbrot fractal. So if you do the math again, you get something interesting, is that this decimal number that's not even an integer, but it is in some sense the dimension of this fractal. So my layman's terms of a fractal is something in itself similar, but has a fractal dimension. So what has this to do with art and beauty? So the interesting thing is that the self-similarity has an interesting property that Mendelbrot, this is actually the man who invented the beautiful fractal, first described. So this is Benoit B. Mendelbrot, and there's a joke about this guy in that what does the B stand for? Does anybody know the middle B? It's actually Benoit B. Mendelbrot again, so his name is actually a fractal in itself, which is quite funny if you think about it. So what he did, what this man did, is he wrote an article that related, and the book actually, related natural things like clouds to mathematics, and they end up with fractals. So there's a video I want to show you of Veritasium, a YouTube channel that really clearly tells this story. So I'm going to show you this.
I've been driving along Australia's famous Great Ocean Road. And I'm stopped here near the 12 Apostles, which are these big sandstone bluffs. Actually, there's only 8 of them left because the others have eroded over time. And erosion is really what's given us this coastline the way it looks now. So that brings to mind a question for me, which is how long is the Australian coastline? Well, if you were to measure it out in lengths of 500 kilometers, you would find that it's about 12,500 kilometers long. But the CIA World Factbook puts the figure at more than double that, over 25,700 kilometers. But how can it be that we have two different estimates for the length of the same coastline? Well, this is called the coastline paradox. The answer is, it depends on the length of measuring stick that you use. So if you connect up the dots from cliff to cliff to cliff, you get a shorter length of coastline than if you measure with a smaller measuring stick and measure into every inlet. So what length of measuring stick should we use? Well, in theory, you can go all the way down to the size of a water molecule. And if you do that, then the length of Australia's coast is virtually infinite. Do you believe me that you could have a finite area object like Australia bounded by an infinite perimeter? It doesn't seem to make sense. But I can give you another example of this. It's called the Koch snowflake. So what you do is you take a triangle with sides of length 1, and then on each side, add another triangle with sides of length a third. Continue doing that again and again forever. And what you end up with is a shape which has a finite area, but an infinite perimeter. Shapes like these are called fractals. And many coastlines have this same fractal structure, which means they have some sort of self-similarity on many different scales. So you can zoom in, and the coastline looks roughly the same. So if you want to know the length of a coastline, you need to first specify the length of your measuring stick, because that's what the answer depends on.
So Veritasium clearly explained that the natural phenomena around us, like the border of a country or clouds, for example, are fractals because they're self-similar and they have this dimension that isn't an integer but a decimal number. And that has an interesting property, because the interesting property, for example, of water is that if I would ask you that how high above the level of water I am at the moment that I took this picture, you weren't able to guess correctly, because I could either be very low and take a picture of the water, or very high and the picture would look self-similar. So this is a very interesting property of these things. And again, you could ask the question, what has this to do with art? So does anybody know what this piece of art is? It's Jackson Pollock, that's correct. It's actually Jackson Pollock's number 5. So Jackson Pollock was a brilliant artist that really transformed art in a way that is very hard to describe. So a lot of criticism that modern art gets is that my 2-year-old could make this. And I beg to differ. The reason is, and again, I'm going to show you a little video of that, is that it has remarkable properties.
Many people have tried to copy Pollock's techniques, some in homage, others in attempted forgeries. But nobody seems to be able to reproduce that magic that Pollock brought to the originals.
Pollock's paintings seem to have captured something of the wildness of the natural world. But for a long time, no one could define exactly what it was that made his work so appealing. Until it came to the attention of artist and physicist Richard Taylor. His unique approach was to invent a machine that could mimic Pollock's eccentric painting style.
It's all based on this apparatus called the Pollockizer.
The Pollockizer?
That's lovely. Now, what it is essentially, though, is what's called a kicked pendulum. And as you know, a basic pendulum is very, very regular, like a clock. But at the top here, what you've got is a little device that can actually knock the string as it's swinging around. And that induces a very different type of motion called chaotic motion.
So this would be like Pollock's hand. This would be what he'd be trying to achieve with that sort of off-balance painting that we do.
Absolutely. So they're very similar processes.
It's very effective.
By recreating his technique, the Pollockizer is able to mimic one particular aspect of the artist's work. And that is that it appears more or less the same no matter how closely you look.
You keep on seeing these patterns unfolding in front of you. And with a Pollock painting, all of those patterns at different size scales look the same.
This is a property known as fractal.
So if I took pictures at these different scales and showed them to somebody, in some sense they wouldn't be able to tell which one was the close and which one was far away.
Absolutely. So as long as you can't see that canvas edge, then you have no idea whether you're standing 30 feet away or 2 feet away. They'll both have exactly the same level of complexity.
More than any other painter, Jackson Pollock was able to consistently repeat the same level of complexity at different scales throughout his paintings. The fractal quality of his work appeals to us because despite seeming abstract, it actually mirrors the reality of the world around us.
When we started to actually analyze the buried patterns in there, this amazing thing emerged. Deep down hidden in there is this level of mathematical structure.
So it's this really delicate interplay between something that looks messy and chaotic, but actually it has structure and some underlying code hidden inside it.
Absolutely, and you can see it not only in his paintings, but you see it everywhere. You know, like a tree outside, you look at the tree from far away, you see this big trunk with a few branches going off. Superficially, they look cluttered and they look incredibly complex, but your eye can sense that there's a sort of underlying mathematical structure to it all. Pollock was the first person to actually put it on canvas in a direct fashion that no other artist has ever done. It really is the basic fingerprint of nature.
And that's what's most fascinating about Pollock's art. In creating works devoid of conventional meaning, he had in fact stumbled across something fundamental. Because fractals are how nature builds the world.
So, if at all God is a geometer, God is a fractal geometer, because he paints the world around him with a fractal brush. And recreating that isn't as simple. You can try this, but it's actually very hard. And just like abstract art is very hard to interpret because there's no inherent meaning in it, you can, by studying it, come to appreciate it, and something similar is true for mathematics. So I had a discussion yesterday that mathematical education is stuck in the 18th century because they don't teach these things at schools, which is a shame because they're awesome. So today, all these talks today are actually about journeys, and maybe this conference is a great journey in itself, in a fractal way. So I would like to invite you on a journey to overcome your fear of mathematics and start enjoying the abstract interpretation of it. So with having said that, no talk about fractals is finished without creating your own fractal. And my fractal is actually a smaller copy of this presentation. So for the next 30 minutes, I will go over the presentation in a smaller detail. I'm just kidding. Thank you for your attention. If you want to discuss fractals or anything else, I'm around today and tomorrow. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Dan. So that is the end of day one in So Coded. And